Hingley.
Now Russia are bombing Syria, is it time that the UK rules out airstrikes in the region?
Should the UK... The Prime Minister was going to revisit this in the autumn, the issue of whether Britain should be allowed by Parliament to conduct airstrikes, not just over Iran, but Iraq, but inside Syria as well. Charlotte Church.
I think that at the moment what is happening in Syria and the amount of different forces at play there, and that Russia have gone in and they're apparently bombing the Syrian rebel army, that if the UK and America went in that it would be ISIS, then eventually the Syrian people are left with Assad, who has killed 7 times more civilians than ISIS. So shouldn't we really be asking what the people of Syria want? Who is their enemy from inside? But also this country has been decimated, it's been destroyed. And I do not think that more bombs are the answer. I don't know what the answer is. I should imagine it has something to do with really careful, patient diplomacy and as much understanding as is possible. But, you're working with extremists and, well, not working with, but up against extremists and terrorism, and, it's terrifying. I get that, but I don't think that dropping bombs in a place where there's already been 20,000 bombs dropped is the answer. Another interesting thing with Syria, actually, which the people that I've spoken to, lots of people don't seem to know about this, but there is evidence to suggest that climate change was a big factor in how the Syrian conflict came about, because from 2006 to 2011 they experienced one of the worst droughts in its history, which of course meant that there was water shortages and crops weren't growing. So there's a mass migration from rural areas of Syria into the urban centres, which put more strain, and there was resources were scarce, etc., which apparently did contribute to the conflict there today. And so, when we're looking at, no issue is an island, when we're trying to look at all of the different factors in this. So I think that we also need to look at, what we're doing to the planet and how that might actually cause more conflict in the world.
Charles Moore, Russia and America both now unleashing bombs in Syria. Should the UK rule out doing the same?
It certainly shouldn't rule it out, but I think you have to look at how extraordinary the situation is. Something happened this week which I'm very surprised people don't pay more attention to it. This is the first time that Russia has launched a military intervention in the Middle East since 1941, when they were our allies against Hitler. And it's an extraordinary event that this great power is starting to drop bombs on Syria and throwing its weight around in this way. And you have to ask, why is it happening? And the reason it's happening is because of the total failure of the West to try to address this situation. Now, that comes primarily, of course, we're only secondaries, it comes primarily from the United States. I'm afraid I think President Obama's foreign policy in this region is a disgrace, because he has not supported any of his friends. He didn't know what to do after the Arab Spring. He said he had a red line about chemical weapons, and then the red line was crossed and he did nothing about it. His foreign policy is that I'm not like Bush. Well, fine, I well understand that, and many people support that, but it's not, that's not the whole of a foreign policy.
What should he have done?
Well, he has to, if he wants to be, as he says, humbler in the world, he has to face the fact that then America and the West will be humbled, and they'll be humbled by nastier people. And that's what's happening. So Russia is becoming the great power in that region, and Russia is a tyrannous and violent power, and this is very bad for Syria. And therefore, before we can talk about airstrikes, we might, in fact, have to have airstrikes, but we have to have a foreign policy. We have to be trying to work out what do we want in this region. And President Obama, and I'm afraid as long as he's in office, we are not going to be told that. He is determined not to say anything about that, and as a result, there is actual collapse in the whole of the region.
Stephen Kinnock.
Well, I think we have to learn the lessons of previous interventions, which is if you don't have a clear political and diplomatic strategy, you shouldn't be using a military strategy. So I think what we need to see here is a recognition of the fact that of the 250,000 people that have died as a result of this awful war in Syria, President Assad bears the majority of the responsibility for that. And I think we need to have a clear vision of what a post-Assad Syria looks like, and that should be our priority. Jeremy Corbyn and Hilary Benn have submitted a draft resolution for the United Nations Security Council, which takes into account all of the diplomatic and political options that we need to have on the table. And I think that that has to be the priority now. If we are looking at military action against ISIL, we have to be absolutely clear what the impact of that will be on President Assad. Will it shore him up for even longer? And there is a risk of that happening. I think that's a risk we have to take very seriously. But ultimately, we need our government now to come forward with a clear plan, because at the moment we're just grasping at straws.
It's said you're going to have a free vote, according to John McDonnell, on this, on the Labour side. Would you vote in favour of bombing Syria if it came to that in the House of Commons?
I would have to have a very clear picture from the government as to how bombing ISIL in Syria would actually benefit.
But you wouldn't rule it out?
I am sceptical, and at the present time, I think that there's a great opportunity to re-engage Iran. The fantastic achievement of re-engaging Iran through the P5+1 process on the nuclear deal. Iran is now more open than it's ever been to an engagement, and of course we know that they are, in the end, Syria is a proxy war. It's Iran and Russia on the one side, and Saudi Arabia and other allies on the other. So let's look very carefully at the options diplomatically now. Bring Iran in. They have huge influence over Assad. I would not say that bombing at this time is going to help us in that diplomatic endeavour.
You, sir.
Yeah, how long have we been bombing now for, though? I mean, the idea that we just need to keep bombing, it's not going to work. I mean, we managed to destroy the Iraqi army of 35,000 in 3 weeks. Why has this not been done? ISIS estimates around about 35,000 members. This could have been over years ago if you'd have just got it sorted. I don't understand why we are still just bombing round the edges.
You think IS could have been destroyed?
Well, we managed to destroy the Iraqi army in 3 weeks. 35,000 members. Okay. Tanks, the lot. This is a bunch of ragtag people with stolen equipment.
Stephen Crabb?
Well,
what do you say to him?
the one thing they're not is just a bunch of ragtag people. They have access to incredibly sophisticated technology.
Unlike the Iraqi army?
They're using forms of brutality which we'd thought had disappeared from the face of this earth, and they've proven themselves to be very effective in winning territory across Iraq and Syria. There's two big things going on in Syria, and they are interrelated. One is the Syrian civil war, which probably none of us really here really fully understand. And that's a question of whether Assad remains in power. And we've been very clear that Assad cannot be part of the solution to Syria's long-term security. The other thing that's happening inside that desperately poor country that's been ravaged by warfare, as you rightly say, is the establishment of ISIL and the caliphate, which extends over international borders. And the immediate priority we see is the destruction of ISIL. I think there's a positive role and a constructive role potentially for Russia to play in that, and they've got a choice about whether they're going to play a benign role on the world stage. But so far they look like they just want to prop up their ally Assad, and that can't be.
Do you want to see the British government put forward in the House of Commons a resolution that Britain will bomb ISIL in Syria?
Well, 2 years ago, we tried to bring forward a resolution.
I know, but do you want it brought forward again now?
And I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that actually there's a less of a role for Britain to play. But
you haven't answered my question. Do you want to see it brought forward again to the House of Commons?
I think,
because there is an argument that enough Labour people would support it for it to get through.
Well, we would only bring it forward if we were really sure that it was going to command a large degree of consensus in the House of Commons. No one would bring it forward for it to get rejected again. That would make a mockery of us, of the United Kingdom on the world stage. So really the onus is on the Labour Party to try to work with us and try to understand this situation at a deeper level.
How do you discover whether they'll support you unless you go to a vote?
Well, there's lots of ways you can get to before a vote
really?
of discovering the opinion of the other party. And I'm looking at Stephen here, and
well, I'm all ears.
We'll be having discussions.
I'm all ears.
You said in the third row.
It seems staggeringly obvious that we should be using military power to assist the forces fighting ISIS in Syria wherever it's possible that they can be of use. If we'd been able to use them while ISIS were advancing on Kobane before they trashed that city and killed a third of its occupants, That is something that British armed forces could have been doing that was useful. We've been so badly burned by the failure of diplomatic and military policy in Iraq that now, and since 2012, when we could have made a real difference in the Arab Spring, we've been too afraid to use our armed forces where and when they could have done a huge amount of good in the world.
Ian, well, can you respond to that point?
Well, I just can't see how more airstrikes, more bombs are going to help the situation.
It's perfectly obvious. If you have ISIS advancing on Kobane and they can be stopped by the use of Western air power, that helps, doesn't it?
But you said if, and we have no idea that that will actually be the outcome, and we have no idea that civilians will be taken out in the interim. And given that there are so many different interventions in the region now, ramping up tensions, there's a real possibility of accidental hits potentially between the USSR and Russia and the United States. There's the danger of civilians. There has to be all effort now put to try and bring people around the table
want to come back on
to
this?
talk.
Yeah, let's just assume that ISIS aren't keen on coming around the table, and let's assume that what they've said over the last week, that they actually want to inflict nuclear destruction on the West if they can get their hands on nuclear weapons, might be right. These aren't people who in all circumstances are amenable to negotiation. These are people who need to be shown that the West has both the power and the will to intervene where its forces can be of military use, and that's what we should be doing.
We should be asking ourselves the question what role our government's intervention back in 2003 had in creating this mess that is now in the Middle East, and how on earth can our government make the situation better after that?
Our government failed. Our government failed in 2003 because there was no clear military plan and no political plan for the occupation of Iraq following a highly successful invasion.
Charles Moore, a brief point, and then I want to...
Just to add to that very well-argued point coming from the questioner, you have to search for the right interlocutors in the region, which failed to be done in 2003, and we haven't even begun to do that. You know, we do have allies there, like Jordan, for example, that has a very difficult role. There are a lot of good movements within Syria, but of course they don't get many recruits right now because they're terrified. Who would join them when they're not being backed by America and Britain, when other things are nasty ones are being backed by Iran, Hezbollah, Russia? It's a matter of working out what you want and finding the people and then exerting that power in cooperation with those people. We've done it before and we can do it again, but we've entirely lost the will to do it. And therefore we are permitting a great genocide and also a huge disruption of the world order, which means, among other things, that hundreds of thousands of people are trying to get into our continent.
Well, the refugee crisis is not going to end. The refugee crisis is going to continue. More and more bodies are going to be washed up in the Mediterranean if we don't pursue peace.
All right, I'm going to move on because we've talked about that before on Question Time. We will come back to it. I've no doubt time